It was already late. Diana wasn't sure how late it was, but she was pretty damn sure it was too late for anyone to call. She hoped it was Marty's phone. Anyway, she just covered her face with a pillow and said, "Thank you," loudly when the call stopped after the 5th ring. She had just made herself comfortable when the bell rang again. "Damn it," she screamed, opening her eyes again. "Martin, answer your damn question." The words stopped abruptly when she realized that her husband was not in bed with her. She glanced at her watch, 3:37 a.m., when she picked up her phone from the bedside table, and wondered why her husband wasn't there. He was there when they went to bed a few hours ago. "Yes, hello." She mumbled something into the phone. "Is this Diana Miller?" Yes, it is. "Who is it? Are you Martin Miller's wife?" "Yes, for God's sake." "Yes. Who is it?" "Mrs. Miller, this is the emergency room at the North City Medical Center. Your husband was brought in about an hour ago, and we had your contact information after the incident a year ago. He had an accident. Could you come right now?" "Oh my God, is he all right?" "I'm not allowed to discuss his condition over the phone, ma'am." "Please come." "Yes, of course. I'll be there as soon as I can." She ran upstairs where her daughter was sleeping. Dallas, named after the city where she was conceived, studied at a local university, but lived at home to save money. She enjoyed living in a dorm in her freshman year, but as she grew up, she realized that living near the campus would not contribute to her studies. "Dal, wake up." "Nothing." "Dally, wake up." This time he gave her a little push on the shoulder. Still nothing. "Dallas, wake up." Dallas straightened up in bed and tried to force her bleary eyes to focus. The light was on in the room. "Dallas, your father was in an accident. He's in the emergency room. You need to get dressed. We have to go." She rolled out of bed and pulled her nightgown over her head, not thinking about the fact that at the age of 20, she was standing naked in front of her mother, having long ago given up wearing bras or panties in bed. It's not like they've never seen each other naked before. Dallas stretched out to her full height of 5 feet 4 inches, and with her left hand unconsciously scratched the bristly brown hair underneath. She really needs to shave. For her part, Diana didn't even notice, as she was too busy pulling out clothes for Dallas. Finally dressed, the two women drove to the hospital as quickly as possible. Dallas began to bombard her mother with questions about what had happened, but Diana had no more information. It seemed like an eternity before they got there, but it only took about 10 minutes, given the lack of traffic. They were taken to Martin's room in the emergency department, and they were shocked by his condition. He was covered in bandages and clearly unconscious. They were given forms to fill out. Your grief doesn't free you from paperwork. Dallas pulled up her chair to be closer to her father. They stayed there for about an hour before a man and a woman in a police uniform entered. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Gail Stanton, and this is my partner, Robert Hansen. We were the first to arrive at the scene. Is there any news about how he's doing?" "No one told us anything, officer." Diana replied, "Oh, this is my daughter, Dallas. We need to ask you a few questions. I know it's not the right time, but it's better to do it as soon as possible. Of course, do you know what your husband was doing outside at such a time?" "He was at home, and we went to bed together around 10 p.m. I didn't even know he was gone until the hospital called." "Ma'am," Officer Stanton Dallas said, "can you confirm this?" "Actually, yes. We watched a movie on TV, which ended at 10, and then everyone went to bed. I saw Dad go into the bedroom with Mom." "What movie?" "Something about Keanu Reeves. Some kind of action movie. Dad chose him. It was his turn. Did you have any special problems? Maybe financial or marital? Something that all married couples would not face." "There are no special problems. I just don't understand why he came out without my knowledge." "Were the people in the other car hurt?" "That's the point, Mrs. Miller. It was a one-car accident, and according to 2 witnesses, your husband's car was driving normally, and then quite suddenly accelerated straight into a large oak tree that stands on the corner of Highways 121 and 288. There were no skid marks, and no one remembers seeing the brake lights." Diana and Dallas looked at the officers when it became clear what they were suggesting. "Are you implying that my husband did this on purpose? That he tried to commit suicide? We need to inspect the car for a possible mechanical malfunction, and of course, we'll need to talk to your husband when he wakes up. But this is certainly one of the possibilities that we are considering." "Yes. Are you sure there weren't any problems worth talking about?" Officers, I love my husband very much and we have a wonderful marriage. No, there are no problems that I could think of. I'm sure it was just because he lost control or dozed off. It was already very late. I'm sure there is, reasonable. Diana burst into tears and couldn't finish the sentence. Officers, Stanton put one of her cards on the table, asking them to call if they remembered anything else, and then left the hospital. Dallas closed the door to Martin's room. You didn't tell them. No, Dallas, she didn't. Her mom replied when the tears subsided. It's none of their business and has nothing to do with it. Your father didn't mind. Maybe he'll say something when they talk to him. Then we'll see. The next few days dragged on slowly. Martin remained unconscious and was admitted to the hospital, and Diana and Dallas spent as much time there as they could. They often went there together and made sure that he was never alone. Fortunately, Diana knew Martin's boss and called him to tell him what had happened and that he would miss work. The accident happened on Saturday night, and Martin eventually began to show signs of waking up on Wednesday morning. By noon, his eyes were open, although he could only look around. Diana was there and noticed his eyes and went to the bed to assure him that everything would be fine. A few seconds later, a nurse hurriedly entered the room. Something on the monitors warned her that the patient had woken up. Diana returned to her seat to let the nurse do her job. Soon, several more medics entered the room to check on Martin. Diana took the opportunity to go outside to call Dallas and tell her that her father was awake. Dallas didn't answer, so she left a voice message. Soon, most of the medical paraphernalia was removed. Martin's left arm was broken, but he was right-handed, and it shouldn't have bothered him too much. His throat was sore from the tube, so they gave him a whiteboard so he could communicate. The nurse read the message and asked him if he was sure. Martin nodded his head. The nurse quickly went out into the hallway while the tests were going on. Mrs. Miller, I must inform you that your husband has asked that you not be allowed back into his room, and the daughter too. What? He's my husband. I have the right to be there with him. I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller, but the patient's wishes come first. Let me just talk to him. We'll sort it out. Diana tried to get past the nurse, but she couldn't get close, so she resorted to screaming. Martin, please talk to me. What's happening? Martin, Mrs. Miller, please stop shouting. You're bothering our other patients. You can wait outside the room if you want. But if we catch you trying to enter the room or make a noise, we will escort you out of the building. Am I making myself clear? Yes, everything is clear. Diana had no choice. Dallas finally got to the hospital 45 minutes later. She found her mother sitting in an armchair outside the room. Mom, why are you here? Your father forbade us to enter the room. To us? I understand why he forbade you. But why me? What the hell does that mean? And why did it take you so long to get here? I just woke up when Bradley came in to see how I was doing. We're kind of like, oh my God, did you make love to your boyfriend instead of being here for your dad? I'm sorry, Mom, but he was unconscious when I left. Dallas replied in a tone that showed she wasn't sorry. It was really stressful, and I needed to relax. It worked really well, for what it's worth. When you get the chance, you should call too. I'm not going to do that, and let's not talk about it right now. It's disrespectful. The irony of the situation made Dallas chuckle. There was a knock on the door, followed by a tall, very attractive brunette. She was dressed professionally, but not like a doctor, although her badge identified her as an employee. Good morning, Mr. Miller. I'm Dr. Lassiter, one of the hospital's mental health specialists. How are you feeling? As well as could be expected, I suppose. 9 days have passed since the accident. His ability to speak has returned. The whiteboard is a thing of the past. He asked when he could be released and could not get a direct answer. Still, the hospital asked me to talk to you. Is this normal? Do I have a choice? Not if you want to return home soon. I really have to release you so that you can be released. The psychiatrist replied with a puzzled smile on her face. Then let's get started. Dr. Lassiter pulled one of the chairs up to the bed and sat down, crossing her long legs. It took her a few minutes to go through the papers. Okay, so you were brought in a little over a week ago after an accident, a collision with a large tree. I also see that you have forbidden your wife and daughter to visit you. And I suspect that these things are somehow connected. I see, Martin replied. She cheated on me. Unfortunately, This is not an uncommon phenomenon these days, although it rarely leads to such a reaction. Is there anything else in this? Martin was silent for several minutes. He really didn't want to talk about it, especially with a pretty woman. He wondered if they had a boyfriend, a really old guy that he could talk to. Dr. Lassiter waited patiently. It wasn't the first time she had to wait for someone to force themselves to speak. Her patience was rewarded. I suffered from depression, I think. Nothing that has been diagnosed or anything like that. I was just, like I said, depressed. From something specific or just in general, I think so. I couldn't. After the previous accident, right? Of course she knew. She probably had his entire medical history in her hands. She just wanted to make him say it. That's right. It wasn't even an accident. I was in the back seat. My boss was in the passenger seat and his boss was driving. We were hit from behind. There were no airbags or even very large damage, but I wasn't ready for that. I hit my head on the seat in front of me. I guess that was the reason. The report says that you had a stroke and a mild concussion. My doctors couldn't explain it. None of the ED medications worked at all. They ran a bunch of tests, some several times, and the best explanation I got was that something had happened and part of my brain was damaged, so you couldn't get to the finish line, which led to your wife eventually becoming dissatisfied with your bed life, which in turn led to her taking a lover. It eventually tired you out and led to the events of that evening. Is it something like this? In a nutshell, yes. And how long did it take before your wife did it? 7 or 8 months, I think. We were trying to take care of things orally, and we had some imitation toys. Yes, I understand how it works, Mr. Miller. Of course, I'm sorry. I'm just a little uneasy. Anyway, everything was fine at first, and we were hoping that mine was the ability will return. We would talk about spending the whole weekend in bed, having a really good time. Of course, this has never happened. In the end, it lasted so long that she decided to take care of her needs elsewhere. Did she discuss this with you beforehand? No, I found out about it when I came home from work early. A hackney cliche, I know, and not only was she at home with her lover, but my daughter and her boyfriend were there too. Did they do it as a group? Dr. Lassiter asked, shock evident in her voice. No, thank God. Diana and Bill were in the bedroom, and Dallas and Brad were in the living room. That's how I found out that my wife was cheating on me, and my daughter knew about and apparently approved, which explains why your daughter was also banned. Yes. Oh, and if I haven't mentioned it before, Bill is Brad's father. We used to know him by chance as the father of our daughter's boyfriend. Later, I found out that it was the daughter who proposed Bill to her mother. This is another blow. Did you confront them? Well, not quite. Maybe if Dallas hadn't been there, I would have run into Diana, but I've already seen enough of my daughter's anatomy. Then I left. How did the explanation go afterwards? Not what I expected. She was sorry that I found out about it, but she made it clear that if I couldn't take care of her, she would entrust it to someone else, and she preferred a permanent partner. As she put it, to finding someone new every time. Bill was free and had similar needs, so he was her choice. What are your actions? What could I do? She was right about me not being able to make love. It wasn't her fault that I couldn't, so she did what she had to do. What if, hypothetically, she had asked you in advance? Would you agree? I've thought about it a lot, and part of me wanted to say that I would agree, because I loved her and wanted her to be happy. But I don't think that would suit me. We made vows, we made promises, and one of them was in sickness or in health. I wouldn't do this to her, so I couldn't accept that she was doing this to me. Obviously, she continued to date him. Obviously, and now that I knew about it, she was less restrained about it. I do not know if she began to do this more often, since I do not know how often they used to do it before. But where before it was limited to the day when I was at work, there were now trips to the store on weekends, and part of that time was clearly spent with Bill. It must have been difficult. Is it difficult? It doesn't even begin to describe the situation. But then again, I didn't think I could do anything. She deserved a bad life, and I couldn't provide for her, and it was killing me. Tell me about the night of the accident. The whole family watched a movie on TV. I kept my pain, that is emotional pain, to myself. I think it was a mistake, but I didn't want to burden Diana or Dallas. They kissed and hugged each other good night, while I was getting a good night from Dallas. I think it was at that moment that I realized that she had completely lost respect for me, as a father and as a man. I could hardly blame her, since I didn't respect myself either. I got ready for bed as usual. Diana did the same. It was the same as always, every night, the same thing. I waited until Diana fell asleep, then got dressed and grabbed my wallet and keys. I went upstairs and looked into Dallas's room. She was asleep too. I blew her a kiss and said goodbye. I went and got into my car. I knew there were airbags there, but I thought if I hit hard enough, it wouldn't matter. I didn't have a specific plan. I just drove around the neighborhood. I knew about the big oak tree, drove past it for the first time, and realized that there were no obstacles and there was a fairly direct approach. I drove around again and headed straight for him. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both letting the story process and their brains. Finally, the doctor spoke. "Mr. Miller, I want to thank you for being so open and honest with me. This is very rare. I'm going to let you rest a little and think about what you've told me. Is it okay if I come back tomorrow?" "I'm not going anywhere," he quipped. They shook hands, and Dr. Lassiter left the room. Martin took his mobile phone, which he had left at home that night, and which Diana had brought to him before he had forbidden her, and replied to several messages and emails. Among other things, he was telling his boss the latest news. When he closed his eyes and tried to get some sleep, when Diana returned home, she tried to control herself. She got the impression that Marty was quite happy with her meetings with Bill, that he gave her this as a gift because he loved her so much. Even when she first heard about it, the incident, she no longer believed it was an accident. She was sure it had nothing to do with it, but now she wasn't so sure. She suspected that the police had spoken to her husband, but hoped he hadn't said anything about her relationship with Bill. The police no longer contacted her, as technically making love outside of marriage is not a crime. The case is closed. However, he never really minded. Isn't it? If so, she couldn't remember it. And besides, she wasn't going to be celibate just because some idiot decided to frame her husband's boss. It wasn't what she signed up for, and she sure as hell wouldn't agree to it now. As soon as Marty returned home, she would try to be more aware of his feelings, more restrained in her relationship with Bill, but she was by no means going to give up. The next morning, as promised, Dr. Lassiter came by. Alas, little Marty remained a recluse. "How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Miller?" "Not much has changed since yesterday, document. I'm ready to go home. But I think it's up to you." "Well, partially, but you were being detained for 72 hours as required by state law. The countdown of this time begins with our conversation yesterday. So at least 2 more days. It's all right, document. At least the food here isn't that bad." They laughed together. An old man, but a good one. Dr. Lassiter noted, "I'm glad to see that you're joking." "Me too. It's been a long time, and by time I mean months since I felt like myself. I used to be a big joker, to the point that sometimes Dallas got on my nerves." "Have you had any other bad thoughts? Will we find any more dark alleys in your mind?" "You know, Doc, that's not the case. I spent a year in a pretty depressed state, and the last few months I've been depressed. I don't feel it anymore. It was replaced by anger, disappointment. Disappointment with Diana and Dallas, of course. More with Diana, but mostly disappointment with myself for not standing up for myself, for not making it clear to my wife that what she was doing was unacceptable." "Do you intend to take this position now?" "Absolutely. Although I admit that I'm tempted to just get divorced, I have to accept some of the guilt for letting her get over me. But if she agrees to stop seeing Bill, then I'm ready to go to a counselor and try to rebuild our marriage." "I can appreciate your determination, Mr. Miller. I rarely see such a turnaround happen so quickly. I had a lot of time to think while I was lying here, before our meeting. I appreciate that you gave me the opportunity to say this, to tell someone about it. It allowed me to focus on my thoughts." "Excellent. Mr. Miller, just excellent. In that case, I'm going to finish today. I'll stop by tomorrow to chat for the last time, but I don't see any reason why you can't leave on schedule. I'm looking forward to it, Doc." Diana and Dallas were there to pick him up when he was released. If he was going to try to change everything, he needed to start by acting like everything was going to be changed. The airbags were surprisingly effective, much more effective than Marty had expected. The worst part was the concussion he suffered, which required him to spend a lot of time resting and relaxing in the dark. The TV was turned off, and some gentle music was playing in the background. His wife and daughter fawned over him. Everything was fine for a little over a week, until Diana announced that she needed to go. Shopping. No, Marty said calmly. What? Diana replied, confused. Marty, there are things we need, including some of your healing creams. Make a list for Dallas. She can go. Why are you dragging me into this, Dad? Besides, I have plans to see Bradley. Then you have an incentive to finish shopping quickly, don't you? Diana, the list. This is ridiculous, Martin. You can't just come home and turn everything upside down. Dallas has plans, and I'm going to the store and it's final. Do you take me for a fool, Diana? A fool? No, Marty, of course not. Why are you asking about this? Do you think I don't understand that these shopping trips are an excuse to see Bill? I've never forgotten to come home with groceries, Martin. Not once, yes, and it's a great cover. But you've been gone too long, and not only that, but I can see it in you. In your eyes, when you're not looking at me. In your clothes when they don't look quite right. In your makeup, it's always a little off. At least you spent part of your time with Bill. And that's not going to happen anymore. The shock in Diana's eyes was obvious, and Dallas suddenly felt a little more respect for her father. See, please, we've already discussed this. Now I will do my best to be more careful. Obviously, I've become a little too relaxed about mind meetings, but I certainly won't give up on him. I have the right to have bed life, and I intend to lead it. So our vows didn't mean anything. Leave everyone else, in sickness and in health, well, it's part of the disease, and you don't leave others. But you're going to do it right now. You will stop seeing Bill, and we will go to a counselor to rebuild our marriage. Or not. And I'll call the divorce lawyer on Monday. You won't do that, Martin Miller. Don't you dare threaten me. If I could make love to you and only you, then I would do it. But I can't. And it's not my fault. I wasn't the cause of the accident. I wasn't even there. Suddenly, because I had nothing to do with it. My bed life is over, and I have to just accept it. That's not going to happen. If you want to talk about it again tonight, then we can do it. But don't you dare think that you can dictate to me what I can and can't do. Without waiting for another word from her husband, Diana walked out of her front door, closing it with a bang that rattled the window. The silence was deafening. Father and daughter looked at each other, and then Marty went to his bedroom. For the first time in her life, Dallas Miller worried about the future of her family, about her parents' marriage. Bill had never really confronted Mom, but then there had never been anything so serious between them. But deciding that this was between them and there was nothing she could do, she cleaned herself up and went to meet Bradley. Although she suspected that Bill had received a little pharmaceutical help, she found that making love to him was better than what she had with Marty before the accident. Part of her hoped Marty would never recover because she wasn't sure she'd ever be able to give up on Bill. Bill was aggressive. Bill was strong. He didn't think that what he was doing suited her. He was just doing it. Marty was always so gentle, so attentive, so Marty, while Diana was being severely beaten from behind. In another part of the house, her daughter was fighting off the octopus's hands of her boyfriend Bradley. Damn it, Dow, what's the matter? Bradley finally asked, disappointed. I'm sorry, Bradley. I'm just worried about my family and I'm not in the mood. She got up and put on her bra again and then her shirt. Bradley just lay there, as if he couldn't believe she was going to let him go. He tried to gather his strength. Come on, baby, let's get naked and have some fun. It will distract you from them. Jesus. Bradley, do you ever think about anything else? Damn, we don't do anything else but make love. How about asking me out on a date to distract me? How about bowling or dinner or mini golf or anything else besides being naked in your room? I like making love, Bradley retorted. It's fun and it's nice. And I don't like bowling or mini golf. So why the hell should I drag you there? Finally, a light came on in Dallas's head. You're right, you wouldn't. And you don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm going home and it's over between us. Find someone else to do nothing with. Dallas left Bradley's bedroom for the last time, ignoring his pleas. Bradley was a good-looking guy, but she suddenly realized that he was just an overgrown teenager. He had no ambition or desire to develop their relationship. He was just trying to graduate from college to get a job at his father's company. And she doubted that he would do anything more there than get a salary and take someone else's place. Damn, child. How many times have I had to tell him not to slam the fucking door? Bill said irritably. Diana climbed in next to Bill, and they snuggled up to each other. Relaxing, Diana realized that she did not love Bill, and he was not even very attracted to her, and Bradley was a lazy slob. But Bill could make love, and if Bradley inherited any of that, then she understood how attractive the young man was to Dallas. It was getting dark outside when Dallas returned home. She found her father resting in his bedroom. There was a faint glow, which she realized came from the bathroom where the light was on and the door was ajar. She realized that her father wanted some light. But none of the lamps in the room were burning so low. Dad, he stood with his back to her and did not turn around, but answered, Dallas, I'm sorry. This attracted his attention. So he carefully sat up in bed and, turning around, saw his daughter quietly crying in the doorway. What are you talking about? He stopped calling her all the little endearments he had previously used after he found out that she had helped her mother find a lover and did not dare to do it now, even though she was in tears. He couldn't help but think that it was all a setup. Dallas moved closer until she was right at the foot of the bed. I'm sorry for what I did. I was just trying to help Mom, you know? She was so upset about what you had to go through and that you couldn't. Their eyes met for a moment. Well, you know what you couldn't do. And Bradley's father had been going through the same thing ever since Mrs. Coyle died. Bradley says his father always talks about how much he misses her, especially the closeness. I thought they could, take care of each other. I'm sorry to say, but I never thought about how it would affect you. That's why you are. Did you do it that night? Marty was surprised by this sudden outpouring of his daughter. It might have been a ruse, but he had to take her confession at face value. If he was fooled, offended, deceived again, then so be it. That's mostly what I think. I was very depressed just because I couldn't. Well, you know what I couldn't do. Father and daughter met eyes again, this time exchanging a brief smile. But it's over now, Dally. I'm not going to do it again. I hope not. I need you. Are you going to divorce your mom? I haven't made any final decisions yet, honey, but I don't see any other outcome if she doesn't stop seeing Bill. But keep it to yourself. She has to change because she wants to, not because she has to. Okay, Dad, I'm going to go upstairs. Oh, I broke up with Bradley tonight. Marty tried to keep a smile off his face. He had never particularly liked this boy, but it surprised him because she seemed to be in love with him or was in love with him. Why? Marty asked, interested in this turn of events. Because Dallies began, then paused to think. Because my dad once told me that he wasn't good enough for me. And I finally realized that he was right. I finally realized that my dad was right about a lot of things. A smile appeared on Marty's lips when he realized that his little girl had grown a lot today. Dallies went up to her father, hugged him, and realized that this was the first hug they had shared in a very long time. Finally, they pulled away, smiled at each other. Then Marty watched Dallies silently leave the room and go upstairs. Before Marty could hear his daughter's bedroom door close, he heard Diana chirping as she locked her car. The kind feelings that had just filled him with joy disappeared in an instant. He lay down again and closed his eyes. A few moments later, Diana entered the bedroom. She took a shower at Bill's, and Marty suggested that it was better for her to come back freshly. Wash, could you help with the groceries? Please, are there really any groceries there? Marty quipped, sitting down. Yes, Marty, I told you I was going grocery shopping, and I did. Marty pulled the bags out of the car and dumped them on the counter. He noticed that there were no chilled or frozen foods. He also found the receipt, and the timestamp showed that she had left the grocery store almost 2 hours ago. I went shopping first, and then I went to see Bill, as it turned out. Even though Marty knew this was going to happen, the evidence in front of him hurt. After putting away his things, Marty headed for the bedroom without saying another word. He wondered if he should even bring up the subject again. It really didn't make any sense. Diana made it clear what she intended to do. So the next step was his response. Something had to change. Did you want to talk a little more? His wife asked in a tone that said it wouldn't do any good. No, Diana, you've made your position clear. Diana's expression and tone softened. She loved her husband and didn't want to lose him. He was her best friend and the person she enjoyed spending time with the most. She really didn't think that organizing her own satisfaction, given the circumstances, should be a problem, and she hoped Marty would eventually feel the same way. Diana nodded approvingly and went to her closet to get dressed. She was thinking about returning to some intimacy with her husband, which she missed so much. But today was not the night. By the time she changed before going to bed, Marty was already asleep. Or at least he pretended well. The divorce did not go smoothly. Diana was furious when the papers were filed. Marty was kind enough to send them home, and made it a point to be with Dallas after he moved into the guest room, which was upstairs next to Dallas' room. Diana fought hard against divorce. She hired a very aggressive lawyer, and he did his best. Marty, anticipating that she might try something like this, and because he thought it would be a good idea, enrolled in a consultation the same week the paperwork was filed. The psychologist he met was respected. The fight might have gone on much longer. But just when Diana seemed about to step on his heels, Dallas intervened. She made it clear to her mother that they were wrong, that Diana's needs did not outweigh the vows and promises she had made. Life is not always fair, and she had to be by her husband's side and suffer by his side. Dallas also made it clear that any further resistance would damage their future mother-daughter relationship, possibly forever. Faced with the loss of both her husband and daughter, Diana felt that she had no choice and refused to object to the divorce. The house was sold. Marty agreed to alimony for several years, knowing that the judge would order it anyway. Diana rented herself a 2-bedroom apartment near her job and was able to work full-time, 8 months after the final divorce. But the divorce left her embittered, especially when Bill let her know they were done. It seemed that there were a couple of other women he slept with, and Diana lost her attractiveness as soon as she was no longer married. Dallas continued to study at college, alternately staying with both parents. Although over time, Diana began to play the victim and continued to blame Marty for the divorce. Once again, when Dallas heard her mother say, "If only he was more understanding," she yelled at her mother, "Have you thought about Dad?" Marty entered the dimly lit club around 10 p.m. It was Friday night, and he just wanted to get out of the house. He was just looking for a short-earned, pleasant pastime. He wanted to have a few drinks and maybe dance. He sat down at the bar and ordered a rum and coke. Sipping his drink, he looked around at the customers and noticed a woman at the far end of the bar who looked familiar, but he couldn't quite remember. There was an almost empty glass of wine in front of her. Her hair was dark brown and long. Marty looked at her intently and remembered. A slight smile appeared on his lips, and he picked up his drink, carefully carrying it, as he walked towards the woman. She looked at him just as he approached her. "Dr. Lassiter?" She looked into his eyes and studied his face for a moment, but did not immediately show any recognition, and Marty thought that maybe he was mistaken. "I'm leaving Dr. Lassiter at the hospital, here in the real world. I'm Vicky, but I'm afraid you're putting me at a disadvantage. It's been a while, and I'm sure that you communicate with a lot more patience than I do with excellent psychologists. I'm much better at names than I am at faces. Try me, Martin Miller." Vicky thought about the name for a minute, and Marty waited patiently for her to admit defeat. He was watching her closely, and if you had asked him later, he would have sworn that he actually saw a light bulb light up in her brain. "Oh, Mr. Miller, an unfaithful wife and a rather sudden collision with a tree, if I'm not mistaken." "You are not mistaken, and I am amazed. We only talked twice more than a year ago. Damn it, almost 2 years ago. It's luck. Don't you want to join me?" Marty sat down, motioning to the bartender to refill their glasses. "Thanks, I'm pleased. So, what brings you here tonight? Are you dating someone?" Marty asked. "I'm trying," Vicky replied, and the sparkle in her eyes made it clear what she meant. "Really? I thought I remembered a rather impressive stone on your finger." "Maybe it was. It wasn't long before my divorce was final. I was wearing my rings, trying to convince my ex-husband, that he really had nothing in common with a 20-year-old cashier other than wanting one of her friends to join them in bed. I'm afraid I didn't succeed." "Oh my God, are they still together?" "This may come as a bit of a surprise to you, Mr. Miller, but after my divorce was finalized, I completely lost interest in Wayne's marital status. I don't have the slightest idea. Of course, it was a stupid question, and please call me Marty or Martin or even asshole. Anything but Mr. Miller. What did your wife call you?" "Marty." "Well, Martin, could you take me to the dance floor?" I'd be glad to. Martin asked the bartender to keep their drinks safe behind the counter, then took Vicky's hand and led her to the dance floor. It was a fast dance, and they quickly got into a rhythm. This song was followed by another fast song, and then a slower song began. They stayed on the floor the whole time, cuddling up to each other to slow music. Vicky wrapped her arms around Martin's neck, while his arms were tightly pressed against her back. Being a guy, Martin immediately noticed the lack of a bra. They stared into each other's eyes for a while, before Vicky rested her head on his shoulder. They still didn't let go when the second song started. Martin was lost in the sensations of this beautiful, soft woman who smelled just amazing. When the song ended, Vicky took advantage of the slight decrease in the volume of the vape music to say a few words. "How about you take me home and do something about it?" Martin took her hand and returned to the bar, paid the bill, and made it clear to the bartender that they no longer needed drinks. He didn't seem surprised. She arrived at the club in an Uber, so they got into his car and Martin drove back to the apartment he had bought. "Vicky, maybe I'm asking this a little late, but how much have you had to drink? It was my first glass of wine on the bar when you came over. What is the question? Because I don't take advantage of drunk women." "Don't worry about it, Martin." They drove into his underground garage and took the elevator to his floor. Vicky was hanging on to him the whole time, and they managed to kiss passionately several times. As soon as the door closed, Vicky grabbed the hem of her dress and pulled it over her head. Martin expected that there would be no bra, but was surprised by the lack of panties. He openly admired Vicky's naked body, starting with her long brown hair, ending with her large full breasts, lush dark brown bush, and long muscular legs. "Oh my God, Vicky, you're stunning." "Thank you, Martin. But what are you just going to watch?" "Oh, definitely fondling. Then show me your bedroom." Martin took her hand and led her down the hall. Fortunately, Dallas was staying with her mother this weekend. Vicky lay on her back on the bed, spread her legs, and ran a couple of fingers up and down her wet slit. "Undress for me, Martin." Gradually, Martin took off his shirt, unbuttoning each button one at a time. Starting with the top one, the shirt fell to the floor when he finished, and he immediately moved to take off his jeans. Finally, Martin lay down next to Vicky on the bed. "I just wanted to feel it live for a minute," she said with a smile. Martin wanted to taste her from the very beginning and was momentarily disappointed when they immediately moved on to making love. But in the end, it worked out. They finally came to their senses after more than an hour of continuous and magnificent lovemaking. Martin was lying on his back. Vicky was lying on her left side and snuggled up to him. They weren't really asleep, but they relaxed into this strange suspended state between sleeping and waking. Martin felt rather than saw Vicky raise her head. "Martin, I just remembered that there was some kind of dysfunction in this story, so I was wondering if you'd remember that." "That's fine. Obviously, this is no longer a problem." "What happened? Only a couple months after the incident with the oak tree, I started to feel, tingling. How should I put it? That's how I think it will feel when the paralyzed limb starts to recover. This went on for several weeks, and then one day I woke up with a morning hard-on. It didn't last very long, but it did." "Were you still married?" "What did you tell her?" "I'm still officially married, yes, but we've been living apart for several weeks now." "And?" "No, I didn't say anything. It was none of her business. After 8 or 9 months, everything was pretty much back to normal." "What did the doctors say?" "They didn't have an answer, at least not a serious one. They did all sorts of tests and scans and compared them to the ones I had when it wasn't working, and they couldn't point to anything. They eventually attributed it to a brain quirk." "Do they think hitting a tree solved the problem?" "They just don't know. Perhaps it was a tree, or perhaps it was a brain that had just been completely healed. There is no way to find out." "Well, then I'm lucky. I suppose it's okay if I stay the night." "Well, aren't we going to make love again in the morning and then have breakfast together?" They made themselves comfortable, as far away from the wet spot as they could, and they settled down to sleep. But Martin had one more question. "Vicky do you think you're ready for a serious relationship?" There was a long pause, and Martin was afraid that he had made a mistake and scared her. He half expected her to get out of bed and ask for a ride home. There was no doubt about her attractiveness to him, and not only her physical beauty. She was smart, and he liked her company. Of course, it wasn't love yet, but after the divorce, she was the first woman he seriously thought about. Can we talk about this in the morning? Of course, good night. Vicky, good night, Martin. Vicky woke up before Martin did. He looked peaceful, so she just let him sleep. She used to shower and then went to the kitchen to see what she could cook for breakfast. Martin's question before going to bed caught her off guard. It wasn't that she wasn't attracted to him, but in fact she was just focusing on having a good time. She had been telling herself for months that she didn't need a man in her life. And on a certain level it was true. She had a good job and some great friends, so she didn't need a man. But if she was being completely honest with herself, she really wanted it. But what would a decent guy say after she told him the truth? Martin was awakened by the smell of something cooking. He stumbled into the kitchen and found that Vicky had used his shirt from yesterday and found an apron that he kept in his pantry. I was going to invite you to breakfast. It's too late now. You can invite me to lunch. Go take a quick shower, and breakfast will be ready. 10 minutes later, Martin joined Vicky in the kitchen, just as she was setting the plates. On the table, there was an omelet, a couple of sausages, and a piece of toast with butter. I didn't know I had sausages there. They were in the freezer. I hope it's edible. Martin took a bite and said it was delicious. Breakfast itself was relatively quiet, and Martin took it upon himself to clean the kitchen, as Vicky had done him the courtesy of cooking. They chatted about nothing in particular until it was done. And when everything was put in the dishwasher, he turned to Vicky. Are you ready to talk? Mostly. Vicky, I don't want to embarrass you or interfere in your business. If you're not interested in anything other than getting laid, then this is what it is. You don't owe me anything. I know. I just need to tell you something. And can we do it in the bedroom? I'll be more comfortable there. They held hands and went into the bedroom and sat on the bed facing each other. Vicky squeezed both of Martin's hands tightly. Martin, I know that we really only met last night, at least in the real world. I think you're a great guy and I definitely like you. But there's something I have to tell you. I said that my husband left me for a 20-year-old girl, and it's true, but that's not the whole story. The main reason he left me is because I can't have children. He wanted children, and went in search of someone who could give them to him. He didn't want to adopt a child. He saw the absence of his own children as a kind of failure, and I was the reason for that. And no, I really have no idea how he feels after the divorce. I'm over 40. I have an adult daughter. I wouldn't mind having kids, but that's not an obstacle. I'm glad to hear that. One more thing I want you to know. Well, at least I want to be honest. I'm not too proud of it. After the divorce was finalized, I felt pretty bad about myself. I was getting older and had just lost my husband to a woman almost half my age. I'm 37, if you're interested. I'm interested, but in no case was I going to ask. They both chuckled slightly. I also felt, incomplete. I think that's the best word. To tell the truth, I didn't feel like a woman at all. How can you be a woman and not be able to have children? I know what you're thinking, but that's how I felt at the time. So I decided to prove that I am a woman. And if I couldn't be a woman with children, then I was going to be a woman who satisfied men, mostly anonymous. But there were a lot of them. I called myself Angela and never refused to go home with someone when I wanted to. This went on for several months until I realized that this was self-destructive behavior and started going to a therapist. Even then, I continued to do it, albeit less often, until finally I reached the point in my life when I was able to stop. Isn't that what you were doing last night? Martin asked cautiously. He wasn't judging her and he didn't want her to think so. But last night she was a cougar out hunting. There was no doubt about that. Yes, it was. I have needs as a woman, and I sometimes go out to satisfy them. But if before I usually left with the one who called me first, now I'm selective about who I choose. There were many nights when I came home alone and, took care of everything myself. I suppose I should be glad I passed the test. Absolutely, Martin. I really enjoy spending time with you. And in answer to your question, I would really like to explore something more, but I want to be honest about what I've been through. I really checked and fortunately didn't catch anything, which was incredibly lucky. I don't need contraceptives, but I can get a certificate from my doctor if you need proof. Assuming you're willing to give it a try, I'd like us both to get tested and agree to be exclusive. Martin sat in silence for several minutes. Vicky waited anxiously, but patiently. Finally, he was ready to answer. Vicky, thank you for your honesty. I know it was very hard. I think I owe you the same thing. Our experience is not too different. After the divorce, I was glad I got through it, but I felt depressed because of my inability. I had no idea how I would ever have a woman, and I was faced with the prospect of living that all alone. My therapist pointed out that as we get older, many women lose interest in sexual intercourse. It seemed to me that I would have to find a woman much older than me or wait a few years. And just as you felt that you needed to prove that you were a woman, so I felt that I needed to prove that I was a man. I went out a lot to find women for bed, proving, at least in my imagination, what a stud I was. I wasn't any more picky than you were. Some of the women were kind of like, well, let's just say I rode a few city bikes and turned a lot of city door handles. It's been going on for a while, and I'm not as lucky as you are. I was woken up by a bout of gonorrhea, and plus the need to admit to my doctor that I had no idea what my partner's names were. We cleared everything up, and during therapy I began to focus on my behavior. It's been a long time since I've been with a woman without protection, but I'll be happy to get tested, and I have no problem with exclusivity. So are we going to try it? You and me? Vicky asked, blinking and knowing the answer. I bet it is, Martin replied to this rhetorical question. Martin's supply of condoms was exhausted by lunchtime. The almost inevitable confrontation with Diana occurred after Martin and Vicky had been dating for about 3 months. Their relationship was very strong, and Vicky and Dallas got along great. Martin and Vicky had their own houses, but they spent every night together, and it seemed like they were going to get married. They went to a club aimed at a more mature circle. The music was played by a DJ, and the insides were designed to separate the dance floor from the tables, allowing for a real conversation. Martin and Vicky were enjoying their drinks and chatting about this and that. The evening was going well, so Vicky was puzzled when Martin's smile suddenly disappeared, and his eyes looked past her. She followed his gaze. Martin and Diana saw each other at almost the same time. While Martin's face became neutral, a grin appeared on Diana's face as she headed towards the table. Diana remained bitter after the divorce, even after all this time. She still believed that she hadn't really done anything wrong, except perhaps for not being careful enough, but satisfying her bed needs with another man when her husband wasn't up to the task was definitely not on the list of things that were done wrong. Therefore, when she came to the table, it was not her intention to be nice. Marty, it's so nice to see you, Diana said in a voice that made it clear she was being sarcastic. Diana, Vicky, this is my ex-wife, Diana. Diana, this is Vicky, Martin said, introducing her, although he would have preferred not to. Nice to meet you, Diana. I've heard a lot about you. Well, I've heard absolutely nothing about you, Diana replied bitterly. We're divorced, Diana. It's been over a year now. My life is no longer your business. Now, if you don't mind, Martin left the phrase in limbo, but it was implied that he was clearly inviting his ex-wife to leave them alone. Oh, of course, Martin. I wouldn't want to interrupt your date. But Vicky, there's something I have to tell you. And what could it be? Vicky asked, glancing at Martin before looking back at Diana. I don't think you want to mess with him. We got divorced because he can't do it anymore. Martin was watching Vicky closely, waiting for her answer, and Vicky moved to stifle that, a quiet giggle. She asked Martin, raising her eyebrows at the same time, Is it true? I don't think you mentioned that. Martin just shrugged his shoulders. It was Vicky's game. Diana thought she had them in her hands, that she had thrown a monkey wrench into Marty's relationship as he had done to her and Bill. She was going to enjoy it. However, her happiness was short-lived. Diana's smile disappeared immediately. Vicky and Martin exchanged glances that slightly mocked Diana's sad attempt to get between. Then Diana was just embarrassed. Wait, what's she talking about, Marty? We're not saying this damn thing works, are you? It seems that on rare occasions, Dallas did not inform her mother about Martin's personal life. Like a champion, Diana, as good as ever. But how was this possible? Did the doctors find a cure? Martin and Vicky were silent. Come on, Marty. This problem ended my marriage. I think I at least deserve to know what was wrong. The smile faded from Martin's face. First of all, Diana, it was your story that ended our marriage, not my fortune. You made the choice to do what you did, not me. Secondly, you don't deserve shit. We're divorced, and my business is just my business. Come on, Marty. You can blame my choice all you want. And I can't say you're wrong, but I wouldn't do it if everything was fine. All right, Diana. It just happened. The doctors think that whatever the problem was after I was in that first accident, it just took time for everything to recover. If you had been patient and stayed with me in my illness as it was said in our vows, then we would still be married. Diana's mouth opened slightly as she tried to think of something to say. This information shocked her. I can't believe it. God must really hate me. He just wants to believe the vows, Martin muttered. What was that? Diana asked, her eyes flashing. Nothing at all. So now you know. Could you please leave us for the rest of our evening? Diana stood in thought for about 30 seconds, then looked into Martin's eyes. You're right, Marty. I'm sorry. I was wrong to do what I did. I was short-sighted and selfish. I should have been stronger. I ruined a good marriage. I'm so sorry. Diana turned and walked out, not only from their table, but also from the club itself. Martin and Vicky watched her go until she was out of sight, actually sympathizing with her. Martin turned back to Vicky. Let's dance, my love. 6 months later, Martin and Vicky got married.